All right. How's everybody doing?
Good.
Everybody have a good week so far?
No, I had to go to work.
School, work, terrible. Do what? Yeah. Sounds like it.
My week.
Well, unfortunately, it's warming up. And it's still warming up. Maybe one of these days it'll snow.
No.
Colorado. I'm okay with snow now.
Colorado. Yeah, see, you don't have to worry about it now.
Yeah, because you don't have to go anywhere.
You know, if it takes about 3 or 4 different farms and it snowed about 60 inches on them, of course, then you wouldn't have to combine it and you get better crops.
Yeah, see, I wouldn't have to do anything. Yeah.
I'm good for it.
All right. Did everybody finish their questions?
Sure.
Did everybody finish the crossword puzzle from the last one?
Yes.
Oh, no. Do what?
I did some of it.
Did some of it?
You got one.
I did all
Kathy's got her.
lesson learned, or the discussion ones. I didn't do those.
All right, so I think we got, let's see, we talked about that one. All right, so can you tell me, is the problem of sexual sin, perversions, etc., a new and recent problem?
Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yeah, it goes all the way back. Sodom and Gomorrah could be, yeah, it goes back a long ways for sure. It's not a new problem. This one is the different verses. Did everybody go through these verses and kind of give a summary? It's verses that we have read already. But what is a summary of Genesis 2, 18 to 25?
Man shall not live alone.
Yeah, man should not live alone. And we talked about the unity there. And so God set that setting for the husband and wife. And we see that in Genesis 2. What about Matthew 19, 3 through 9?
The problem with this area is they did not give you anywhere to write.
No, they didn't. You have to write on the edge. What about Matthew 19?
God hates adultery.
God hates adultery. That's definitely what that's talking about. What about Hebrews 13, 4?
Marriage is honorable.
Yeah, marriage is honorable. And the bed is undefiled. And so it's talking about keeping that sexual stuff in the marriage and only in the marriage. And it's the way God designed it. 1 Corinthians 7, 2 through 5.
Your own spouse.
Do what?
Your own spouse.
Yeah, your own spouse. They're supposed to not defraud one another. And so we see that it's designed for marriage again. Galatians 5, 19 through 21.
Works of the flesh.
Yeah, works of the flesh. And so you see that those that are doing these things, which is fornication or adultery, do they have a hope of eternal life if they stay in that?
If they stay in it.
You know, that's one thing we got to remember if a person stays in that. And because it is you go to 1 Corinthians, what is it, chapter 6? I think it's chapter 6. Paul talked about how that was some of them, the things that they were doing, that had done, that was their past. And so it's a list of pretty terrible things that some of us might think terrible things, and that was their past. And so they changed. What about 1 Corinthians 6, 18?
Flee fornication.
Flee fornication. And so we see that is a trend throughout the New Testament. It's been the same since the Old Testament to flee fornication. What about Genesis 1:28?
Replenish the earth.
Replenish the earth. And so that happened before sin entered the world. So that means that God did, that sex is not a reaction of or a consequence of sin. It is something that God designed. Leviticus 20 and verse 10.
I wrote adultery.
Yeah, simple as that. Do not commit adultery. What about 2 Timothy 2:22?
Flee youthful lusts and have pure hearts.
Okay. The youthful lust is definitely talking. It's not all. It doesn't include. It doesn't mean it's just the sexual things that it's talking about there. The lusts that are sexual on that side, but it's talking different things that youth are affected with. But that is a big one, and especially for someone like Timothy and what he was doing, going from place to place and working with people, teaching people. He had to be careful. And Paul was telling him to be careful and flee those lusts because he was to be an example. And it's the same for us. All right. And in the lesson, we learned our world or culture is overwhelmed with so much sexual perversions. And we talked about that. God created man and woman with natural, healthy sexual desires. And so it is not bad. It's not evil. It's what God designed. Sexual desires may be satisfied with God's approval only in an acceptable marriage. Why is it only an acceptable marriage?
That's how he designed it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's how he designed it. What else?
Not all marriages are acceptable.
That's the key, yeah. Not all marriages are acceptable. We talked about that in Matthew 19:9. There's marriages where a person cannot get remarried because they committed fornication. And so that would be not an acceptable marriage. Then you have what we're going to talk about, homosexuality. Homosexual marriage is not a acceptable marriage, and so it's not allowed either. God's plan from the beginning was one man, one woman together until death. That's the way God designed it. God hates divorce, and he desires for a couple to work it out if they can. And unfortunately, it doesn't happen. I heard the other day of someone that I knew, him and his wife are getting divorced, and I don't know the situation or anything, but it's I think it's just over because they couldn't get along. They've been married for many years, and so it's sad to hear that. Yeah, so God designed us to be together, to work things out. God hates divorce. That was Malachi 2 and verse 16. Within marriage, God intended for man and woman to fulfill each other sexually. And so we're not to refrain from one another. We both have, both the spouses have those desires. And God said not to defraud one another because what that can lead to is problems. It'll lead to issues. Sometimes that happens and it causes a problem for both. Adultery, fornication, homosexuality, etc. are sinful, damnable sins. And we definitely talk about that. If we commit such sins and refuse to confess and forsake such, we will be lost. So that is lesson 3. Anybody got any questions or anything to add to what we talked about? Hopefully we covered it pretty good. But if not, then we will move on to lesson 4. And so lesson 4 is talking about homosexuality. Not long ago, I did a sermon, and then we did a Sunday night class on this topic. And so if you want, I tried not to cover some of the same information I did in that lesson. And so, but if you want that information, I have it, and I can print it out and give it to you again, a handout. From the sermon also, if you'd like. But what I want to do is I really want to look at this from 2 different ways. First, we're going to look at it from science because there is a push. It's been a push since we're going to see it since 1991 that there is a gene that causes a person to be homosexual, is what's believed. And there's been a lot of research that has been done over the many years to see if that is true or not. And so I want to look at the science because the book mentions it. This lesson does mention it, but it doesn't get into depth about it. And I would like to look at some of the research and some things. And so that's what your handout is. If you want more information, I know it's 4 pages. This is only part of this. There's a 3-part article done by Apologetics Press. Apologetics Press is really good. They very intelligent people, very trustworthy. They've done a lot of research, and so I've pulled a lot from there and put it into our handout for tonight. And we're going to talk about that. But to start us out, somebody want to read paragraph 1 and 2 of lesson 4.
Sex as God designed it is wholesome and pure, as we learned last week. When married people have sex outside of their marriage, it is called adultery, and such action is wrong in God's sight. This week, we will continue to examine some of the moral issues you must face regarding sexuality. If you have watched a newscast or read a newspaper lately, you have probably heard something about gay rights or homosexual political rallies. Homosexuality is when 2 people of the same gender have sexual relations. Our culture is becoming increasingly permeated with homosexuality. It is flaunted on many television shows and popularized by many celebrities. According to popular culture, homosexuality is an acceptable alternative lifestyle. According to some, 1 in 10 Americans is an active homosexual. Further, according to some, homosexuality is genetic, like hair or eye color, and one is charged as being a bigot if they do not accept it. However, these statements are wrong. Research shows only 1 to 2% of Americans are homosexual, and there is not a genetic link to homosexuality. It is a choice. What about homosexuality being an alternative lifestyle? Because the Bible is our guide, let us go to God's word for God's response to homosexuality.
All right, so as this talked about, I think this was written, I don't know exactly when, what year this was written, but it's been I'm sure it's been a few years, but it talks about how if you've seen it, if you had an article or something like that, you've probably seen something about it. I think it's definitely more prevalent in our society than it was probably when this was even written. And it's getting more and more in our face about this subject. And I want to approach this because, as we're going to see, and we've already talked about homosexuality is sin. We know that. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to look at the verses again. And it's sin. It's just like any other sin. And so when we talk about this, look at it from the aspect that just like when we talked about fornication, which fornication includes homosexuality. It does include that in the word. But even when we talk about fornication, it is being pushed on our children in our society. Even that. And then the thing is that's been the case for years. Even before the homosexual movement has been in our forefront, in front of our faces, fornication has been pushed. With the sex education that's going on in schools, I mean, the things we talked about, it's already been pushed. It's in all the TV shows. It's in every movie. I mean, almost every movie has some type of allusion to some sexual thing. Almost every show does. We already talked about that. And so we haven't really been in an uproar about that. A lot of times we accept that. And we've talked about that as we go through looking at the different movies that it's in, sex outside of marriage, fornication. As we go through and look at how many movies it's in, sometimes it gets to the point where we just kind of accept it and go on. It's just like, okay, it's going to happen and go on. And the reason is, why do you think that's the case? Why do you think it's the case that we see it, in the romantic movies and things like that, or whatever the case may be, a TV show? We just kind of know it's going to happen. We know it happens. They may not show anything, but it's alluded to it or some other thing, and we just kind of go on and don't care about it.
I don't know if we accept it as the fact that we don't know what to do about it. It's one big deal, because there's a new show coming out called Bros, and if you've been watching the, previews of it, that's all it is.
Mm-hmm.
But as a person, what can I do about it?
Yeah.
So to me, what I do about it is I don't watch it.
Don't watch it. That's right. And I think that's right. I don't know. I'm not trying to say we accept it. It's just that sometimes it's a part of all the movies we watch for the most part, and we say, okay, we'll just skip over it, or things like
It's
that.
hard to do it with your pocketbook, but that's the only way they're gonna listen.
It is. It
And
is.
it's
Unfortunately.
probably not enough for them to notice,
Yeah.
but
That's why you stick to your same.
Stick to your same Iron Man movie. Or Captain America, sorry.
Take offense to that.
Well, the thing is that Hollywood, the point I'm trying to work towards is Hollywood has adapted that sin into our society, into the movies, into our TV shows, and it's become common. And so the next movement is homosexuality, transgenderism, things like that. Disney especially, it is so frustrating what Disney is doing. I am so tired of it because I love watching the Marvel stuff. I like watching the Star Wars stuff. I mean, I just love that stuff. I always have. And it is getting their new shows that come out. They're pushing it big time.
that light.
Their movies. Yeah, Lightyear, I've heard.
I mean,
I haven't either. But I've heard it's bad. And that's a cartoon. Yeah, it's frustrating. And so it's getting pushed into, it's in a sense, Hollywood is the forefront to this. That's what we're going to see. That Hollywood is really the one that pushes an agenda. And after a while, it becomes normal and people get used to it. I've said this many times. I remember when Modern Family came out, that TV show. I've never watched it. I've seen clips of it, but I've never sat down and watched an episode. But I remember when it came out, right before that, the Supreme Court knocked down the law that a homosexual couple could not be married and allowed it. And people were in uproar. And then that movie, that show came out. People started watching it. And the same people that were telling me that they were going to vote these Supreme Court justices out, after they watched that show for a couple of years, were fine with it. They said, oh, it's fine. Whatever, I don't care about it anymore. And it's because we get accustomed to it. And that's what Hollywood's trying to do. And so I'm kind of getting off track, but that's what we're going to talk about a little bit later.
it's the frog in the progressively hot water situation.
Yeah, it is. It's just a slowly indoctrinating. And it's sin. And we're going to see that it's sin. And so it's just like any other sin. Fornication, sin, whatever the case may be, it's sin. And so we've got to be alert of what our society is trying to do. And so here are some alarming facts in our country. And like I said, there's going to be a lot of quotes. That's what this is. I'm pulling these things from some of the articles that I read. And the main one is Jeff Miller. It says, the first one here, it says, Eric Lyons documented in 2011, public education has been targeted as a tool for promoting the gay agenda and great effort. The Girl Scouts were targeted, changing their guidelines in 1980. I did not know that. 1980. To allow lesbian scouts and troop leaders. As of 1997, the staff was said to be 33% lesbian. That's 97, so that's several years ago. Their goal is not to merely to gain sexual access to girls, but to indoctrinate. In 2015, the Boy Scouts followed suit and in a 45-12 vote, ended the ban on homosexual leaders. Now, fast forward to February of this year, and that's talking about, I think it was this year. Or maybe it was last year. The Boy Scouts declared bankruptcy after multiple sexual abuse lawsuits were filed against them. The number of sexual abuse claims has now surpassed 82,000. 82,000 sexual abuse claims. That's scary. And that's the thing is it's scary, and that's some of the things we've got to think about because these are where our kids are at. This is groups where our kids are at, and it's sin. The next one. If such information were not enough to cause concern, the activities of the NAMBLA, the North American Man-Boy Love Association, should cause outright alarm. Beyond merely trying to indoctrinate children to be accepting of the gay agenda, many gay activists are seeking to gain legal sexual access to little boys. Well-known He's not old enough.
Sticky note is still there.
It's still there. All right, so it says, well-known child psychologist and author James Dobson in his book, Bringing Up Boys, highlights the movement being spearheaded by the increasing influence of NA-MBLA. It promotes, as it implies, sex between adult men and little boys. Dobson noted that their motto is sex before 8 or else it's too late. According to, I've heard this before, I've read this before. According to the organization's website, man-boy love is the love of a man for a boy and a boy for a man. Enjoyable, consensual, beautiful. Under the heading, the love that dare not speak its name. The organization erroneously likens its advocacy of pedophilia to the love between Jonathan and David, or David and Jonathan. And that's a big one. People say that there was a gay love between David and Jonathan, and that is not biblical and is not true. It is beautiful, it's fine, it's a quote. It is the noblest form of affection. There is nothing unnatural about it. Under their heading, why NAMBLA matters, the organization states that it has been and continues to be a beacon of moral support for all individuals who feel a natural love for boys, including indoctrinating individuals who define as boy lovers. That's pretty severe.
But they're trying to indoctrinate just like I promise you.
It is.
It is the exact same thing.
When I taught this several weeks ago, I talked about a manifesto. And in that manifesto, it talked about this. This manifesto was written back in 1982, and it's now being shared as the manifesto for LGBTQ, whatever it is. And it states in there, did I miss one? But it states in there that we are going after your children. Now, this is nothing new. I didn't say this back when we were doing it with talking with the kids in here, but this is nothing new. If you look at Greek culture, during the time of the Greeks, it was a normal thing for an adult man to take a young boy out into the wilderness and to do these things. And a part of that was it was shined upon, it was looked upon as a good thing because he was supposed to be the mentor to this young man or young boy. It was a boy. They're usually 12 to 14 at this age. But they would take them out. They would teach them how to fight. They would teach them, literature, culture, things like that. But the homosexual treatment was a big part of it. And once they came back after 3 to 4 months, the child was allowed to either stay with that man or go on and live his life to do what he wanted. And that was the case. In Greek culture, it was not accepted for an adult male to have sex with an adult male. That was not accepted. It was only between an adult male and a male child. That was the only thing in Greek culture. And so this is nothing new. It's been in our history, and it's still here. It's working our way this direction.
I saw a thing last night that disturbed me. I was looking to see if I could find it, but I couldn't find it. But a Christian put on Facebook that she saw I'm not sure if it was a book or an article or what it was. I couldn't remember. But I think it was Glenn Beckett. Is he a bad person? Like somebody really? I couldn't remember who it was.
It's kind of crazy.
Okay, I couldn't remember the name. I want to say that's who it was, but whatever it was an article that put out, or a book that was put out that I don't even want to say it, that they're trying to teach right now that 8 to 12-year-olds should watch their parents. That's
really?
what they're trying to put out, the new agenda, that they should watch their parents in bed or whatever. But I'm like, I was scrolling through it and I just like, it was a Christian saying, I can't believe this is happening, and showed that, this is happening. And I showed Caleb, he's like, no, thank you.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. A lot of this is in the extreme.
I'm like,
Yeah.
I mean, none, period, but
The
still,
problem,
it's
a lot of the
like,
problem is like just because you're a Christian doesn't mean you be naive
right,
and conviction rates of pedophiles and their how long they spend in prison is just absolutely nothing compared to some of the other drug offenses and things. Pedophilia is absolutely half the time. It is a severe crime, but it's not
Treated that way.
what am I trying to say? The prison sentence is shorter.
Yeah. And then they get out and they're on the registry. And
I can't remember if it was that person, but whoever it was, I was just like, you've got to be kidding me. But a Christian had put it there to show people these things are happening in our world right now.
yeah. You know, and the thing is that, like I said, this is some extreme cases, but we also need to realize if we had been doing this class maybe 40, 50 years ago, we would be talking about the hippie movement and the things that was going on and being encouraged then in our society. And it was fornication. It was both, actually. But
See how that's multiplied though?
it has.
I mean, you look down through it and who's in charge? All you do is you sit and you watch. If one generation messes up and doesn't do what they should do to teaching, it snowballs. You're getting down now to where even my generation, and half of them aren't doing what they should be doing or teaching the way they should be doing. So now you have more problems yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I know in some cases where, you know, the thing is, I think some of the younger generation are starting to wake up to some things. And hopefully that is the case. And so it's really important for our teens back there to wake up to what is sin and what God approves of. And so here's the last one in thinking about this. It says Dobson highlights the world effort in which pedophiles are engaged to lower the age of which a child can legally consent to intercourse with an adult. The result has been to lower the age from 18 to 16 in England, to 15 in Sweden and France, to 14 in Canada, Germany, Iceland, Italy, San Marino, and Slovenia, and even 12 in Spain, Holland, Malta, and Portugal. As many of these ages, of course, a child has not reached puberty. And yet, as Dobson notes, he has given his consent. He can give his consent to older men who wants to use him sexually. Since the activity is legal, as long as it's consensual, the parents of those children cannot legally prevent it. That's scary. And so this is something, like I said, this is some of the things that we can look at, pedophiles and things like that, and it's terrible what can happen. And so what has changed our society's thinking? And as I already talked about, it started with television. I really believe that's kind of where it started. Has that been the case throughout for forever? No, but I really believe that television has changed the way our society thinks. Here's a quote from Jeff. He said this: at least 4 shows featured homosexual characters or a cast positive light on the lifestyle in the 70s, 7 in the 80s, 23 in the 90s, and by the 2000s, virtually every show would be included in this list. And the shows became more brazen in featuring homosexuality. Queer as a Folk, Queer Eye for the Straight Guy. I remember when that came out. That was a big deal. Modern Family, Shameless, and The New Normal. And so this is just a few shows. There is a lot more now that have come out for sure. And like I said, it gets so frustrating. You start watching even like one of the hero shows or whatever the case may be on the CW or whatever, and you start watching it, and then after a while they introduce it. Every show has. Other shows, sitcoms you may watch. And so it starts, or watched, watched. Because once that happens, I'm tired of it. With the amount of entertainment that we have at our fingertips and with the indoctrination of Hollywood, quote, should it surprise us that the bulk of our siblings, children, and grandchildren do not see a problem with homosexuality any more than they see a problem with fornication, adultery, or divorce? We have been brainwashed. That's the key. Society does not have a problem with fornication. Society does not have a problem with divorce. Society does not have a problem with adultery. You see it's prevalent everywhere. And the next thing is our society is not going to have a problem with homosexuality, because once you start indoctrinating, when you start making it normal, that sin becomes accepted by the majority of society, and it becomes a normal thing. The thing is, fornication is wrong, adultery is wrong, divorce is wrong, so is homosexuality. And we need to see that even with some of the arguments that some people have that it's scientific, it's not, and we're going to see that. And we're going to talk about that some more. But we're out of time. Anybody got any questions or comments? Nothing? All right. Well, thank you guys for your time.
It's not that cold.